But I wanted you to bring this home for American viewers, Rania, because when we talk about what's going on in Israel, we often hear about American taxpayer dollars going to fund about $3 billion annually the U.S. gives Israel solely for military purposes. But less is known about the relationship between actually American police departments in Israel. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so almost every single American police department across this country has sent senior commanders to train in Israel since 9/11 under the cover of counterterrorism training. So they're learning tactics that Israel's using to suppress and dominate Palestinians. And they're taking those tactics and bringing them back here. And it's scandalous, and it's kind of shocking that nobody pays attention to that. But just last month, in September, several police departments went on an ADL organized trip to Israel before this escalation began. And since then, since that trip they took, I mean, Israeli soldiers and police have shot dead over 30, almost 40 Palestinians. So, I mean, you can imagine how concerning it should be that our security forces here are learning from a regime that's engaged in serious violations of human rights and war crimes on a daily basis.
There's no end in sight to the violent standoff between Palestinian protesters and the Israeli police and army as clashes spread today. The RT crew that's been filming in Ramallah today was also caught up in the conflict, all part of what's being declared a day of rage. As the violence continues and tensions escalate, more people are living in fear as they go about their daily business. RT's Paula Sleer is on the ground.
This is bus number 78, which is normally very busy at this time of day. But as you can see, it's practically quiet at the moment. And that is following 2 attacks earlier this week on another bus that was doing exactly the same route. The bus journey is down the main thoroughfare of Jerusalem. Many streets are empty, people are afraid, and increasingly this has been called a knife intifada or a knife Palestinian uprising. So many Israelis concerned, where exactly is that next knifing or stabbing going to come from?
We have been already for 3 months in a third intifada. They're just not calling it that. It's not words, it's facts.
Are you a little bit more afraid than usual?
I'm not afraid, I have to be honest. I pray before I go anywhere.
Are you taking any kind of security precautions that you weren't taking before?
Yes, I have this pepper spray. I'm 63 years old, the first time I've ever walked or had pepper spray.
We're approaching the stop where the 2 attackers boarded the bus. We're not far from Jabal Mukaber, which is an Arab neighborhood which has been surrounded by security forces and soldiers. Hundreds of troops have been deployed to boost the security presence here on the ground. The attackers came from this direction. As soon as they got onto the bus, the one started shooting, the other started stabbing. The bus driver tried to open the door so people could get off, but one of the attackers closed the doors, which forced security on the outside to shoot through the windows. 20 people were injured and 2 people were killed. In response, as you can see, the neighborhood has been shut down by Israeli security forces, which has many Arabs up in arms, saying it's not fair that ordinary citizens are now being penalized. What certainly is clear is that catching a bus in Jerusalem is not what it used to be, as Israelis are increasingly more and more afraid that people will take out a knife at them. Paula Sleer, RT, Jerusalem.
Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined now by Rania Halak in studio. She's a journalist with the Electronic Intifada. Rania, I wanted to start by asking you for your response to what we just saw in Paula's piece. Israelis afraid to go about their daily lives. Can you juxtapose this with what and how Palestinians have been living for decades, and why you think we are seeing this spike in violent tension now?
Well, this is a predictable outcome of Israel's decades-long brutal military occupation. This is the reaction to it. It's a backlash, and this is what happens in the face of colonial violence. And it's to be expected. And what we just saw, as awful as it was, I mean, on the other end of things, you've got Israel over the past, since October 1st, has killed almost 40 people, 40 Palestinians, many of them demonstrators shot dead while demonstrating. They've been using live bullets to suppress demonstrations. And, and on top of that, there's been over 1,500 Palestinians injured. And this is just in the last less than a month this has been taking place, and Palestinians are being shot dead. So this is a reaction to that. And Israel's response to this violence has been to clamp down harder and to escalate. And so you've seen an escalation on the other side as well.
And we actually have a map that I want to pull up just to put this in historical context. You mentioned colonial occupation, and I think we have a map that shows just the way the territory has changed since 1946. That was before the UN mandate created Israel, and we can see the Palestinian land slowly disappearing. How much do you think that, plays into all of this and is really missing from a discussion?
I mean, it's a huge factor. It's the root of the problem, and it's kind of stunning to see how it's constantly missing. This context is missing from reports on this. I mean, if you were to base your opinion on what's taking place on U.S. media reports, you would come out thinking, oh, these people are just irrationally angry and violent towards Israel.
In fact, Jody Redoran at the New York Times actually suggested it was like Facebook that was inciting this, with no mention of the occupation whatsoever. But when it comes to the West Bank and on the global stage, the Palestinian Authority is really presented as the voice or the government of the Palestinian state, whatever that means. But how much do they have a hand in what we just saw, the slow disappearance of Palestinian land, and also what has their response been to these demonstrations?
Well, since the Oslo Accords and the so-called peace process began, the Palestinian Authority has become this subcontractor for the occupation. It basically does, carries out the occupation for Israel in certain parts of the West Bank and suppresses protests. That's what it's doing right now. It's arresting, activists and suppressing protests. And I mean, Israel really relies on the Palestinian Authority to keep any sort of actual organized uprising from taking place. So yeah, they do totally play a role in creating what's taking place right now.
We have about a minute and 30 seconds left, but I wanted you to bring this home for American viewers, Rania, because when we talk about what's going on in Israel, we often hear about American taxpayer dollars going to fund about $3 billion annually the U.S. gives Israel solely for military purposes, but less is known about the relationship between actually American police departments in Israel. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so almost every single American police department across this country has sent senior commanders to train in Israel since 9/11 under the cover of counterterrorism training. So they're learning tactics that Israel's using to suppress and dominate Palestinians, and they're taking those tactics and bringing them back here. And it's scandalous, and it's kind of shocking that nobody pays attention to that. But just last month, in September, several police departments went on an ADL organized trip to Israel before this escalation began. And since then, since that trip they took, I mean, Israeli soldiers and police have shot dead over 30, almost 40 Palestinians. So, I mean, you can imagine how concerning it should be that our security forces here are learning from a regime that's engaged in serious violations of human rights and war crimes on a daily basis.
As always, I wish we had more time, but that will have to be it for now. Rania Khalek, a journalist at the Electronic Intifada, thank you so much.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.